the newsagents.
We are standing outside Fulton County Courthouse. It's in the state of Georgia, and it's where Donald Trump faces 13 criminal charges, including those of conspiracy to overturn an election. Now, Georgia's a swing state, what they call a purple state. It went Democrat last time round, the first time in about 30 years. But today's polling give Trump a significant lead. So 1 year out from the general election, we're talking to voters. We're asking if the people of Georgia are ready to give Trump a second chance.
I got Trump 24, so...
You want him back?
Yeah.
Does it matter that he's in so much legal trouble?
No. Doesn't.
Hell no.
Welcome to the Newsagents. It's Emily.
And it's Lewis. And later in the show, we're going to be talking about Suella Braverman's comments over the weekend about homelessness and indeed whether it is, as she seemed to imply, a lifestyle choice.
But we start here in Atlanta, Georgia. We're 51 floors up. Not so great for some of our team who suffer from vertigo. But imagine this. In a year's time, a year today, America will know who their next president will be. And there's been some overnight polling, which is pretty challenging for Joe Biden quite now and pretty heartwarming for those who support Donald Trump, because they've looked in the New York Times and the Siena polling at 6 key swing states. These are the kinds of places, or these are the places that Joe Biden won comfortably last time round. And in 5 of them, he is trailing Trump. In one of them, Nevada, he's 11 points behind Donald Trump. Here in the state of Georgia, he is 6 points behind Donald Trump. And I think it's fair to say this is sending shockwaves through some of the Biden camp, through some of the Democrats' camps, who are starting to try and work out what is going wrong. Is it about age? Is it about policy? Is it about messaging? Is it something that Donald Trump is doing right, or is it something that the Democrats are just not getting? And so over the course of today, we're going to try and just figure out with some of the voices that we've been talking to across this state, what people are not only thinking, but feeling about the presidential year ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is really fascinating polling. And of course, I suppose we should say, Emily, shouldn't we, that this is the big caveat, which in a way you've already alluded to, which is, we're a year away from the election. It's a political eon. Joe Biden, at this point in the presidential cycle in 2020, I mean, Biden looked like he was nowhere. He went on to lose the Iowa caucus. He went on to lose the New Hampshire primary. It looked like his whole campaign was going nowhere. Today, he's the president of the United States. So there is so much political water to flow under the bridge. But as you say, I mean, there is some nonetheless really striking data in this polling, not just the headline stuff about the states that he could potentially lose, the sort of key elements of the Biden coalition, both geographically, but also in terms of kind of the coalition, right? So something that really struck me, black voters who voted for him in 2020 by a factor of 90%. Now only 70% of black voters supporting him. Latinos was 60%. Now he's basically tied. Young voters, 70% back in 2020, and now basically tied. And then this other statistic, because you could argue, well, maybe he could just try and reassemble those parts of the coalition. This other bit of the data which said that 70% now believe that Biden's too old to be president, and that was only 30% 4 years ago. Like, that is a massive swing to take place in a relatively little amount of time. So we can probably deduce from that, right, that not only, obviously, I mean, Biden has literally, of course, got older, but also that voters are seeing his performance, seeing him in office. And we all know, sometimes he trips, sometimes he stumbles, sometimes he does appear to have deteriorated in some ways cognitively since 2020. And that is something that arguably he can't do anything about. He's only going to get older, right? He's only going to get older.
Well,
and people say Trump, well, he's the same age or roughly the same age, and that's true. But obviously, Biden is the president now. And the question is whether he can do anything about that. And in terms, to me, if I was sat in the Biden camp, that is the thing I would be worried most about, because, of course, not only has he got to get to next year, but he's also got to get through an election where the spotlight will be completely on him, and he just needs one Mitch McConnell moment, and that could be it.
Yeah, I would say yes and no. It's not as if Biden is suddenly getting older more quickly. I think what explains those numbers is the effectiveness with which Donald Trump has done his messaging right. Let's not forget that Trump is only about 3.5 years younger than Biden. And yet when voters are asked in that same poll if they think that Trump's too old, only 39% of voters think that he is. And so I think you have to, I mean, I'm going to say weirdly, we are back in 2015. We are partying like it's 2015, where suddenly we're just trying to ask ourselves those same questions. Why is Trump so effective with voters? Apparently, these are only polls, clearly. Why are we trying to work out still, nearly 8 years, 9 years later, what the Trump factor is? And I think part of it is so much to do with how good he's been at messaging. And he has been round the country many times, reminding people of Joe Biden's age, reminding people of the woes with the economy, reminding people of the difficulties of a country he says is now at war, been dragged into foreign wars. And what was amazing was when we were going round, I mean, we've been sort of all over, crisscrossing this state. And yesterday we were in a very Republican part of the country, 87% vote Republican in the county of Columbia. But what we found was that people were literally repeating back to us the lines that you have heard Trump use on those rallies time and again. And it was almost like, this isn't an accident. They were mirror imaging his words to them. If Trump tells people that Biden's too old, his fans will repeat back that Biden is too old. This is not to say that many people don't think he has cognitive problems, that many people don't think he's too old for the job, that many people aren't worried about having an 80 or 84-year-old in office. But I think it also speaks, this gap that Trump has managed to create between his age, perceptively, and Biden's age, perceptively, I think speaks to the way that Trump has sold this line back to the people that he's speaking to. So as I say, we were in this county fair in Columbia. Imagine there are fairground rides and there is an animal petting zoo and there is candy floss and there are corn dogs and there are lots of families milling around. There is even a human cannonball, a guy being fired out of a cannonball into a net. And we're getting a sense from people there of what they're thinking about their political leadership now and in a year's time. And here's just a flavour. Remember, it is a heavily Republican part of the world. It is true red. It did not go blue in the same way that the rest of the state did eventually in 2020. But here's a flavour of what some of those people think about Donald Trump and about who they want to lead them. If it is Donald Trump, does he get your vote or do you stay at home?
Absolutely gets my vote.
Yeah, I'm not going to not vote.
I do not want to have what we have right now.
No.
Sorry.
We're not going to not vote.
So anything but Biden, basically, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all you got to look is inflation, gas prices, food. The border issue with rampant.
I mean, it's just about everything.
I mean, they're letting criminals over, they're letting pedophiles over. I mean, it's just horrible for the people down around Texas and Arizona.
Trump 24.
Why?
Because, hey, he had his country in the right direction.
I'd like to see some other candidates.
So neither Biden nor Trump?
Neither one for me. The state of our economy right now and how we got to this place, I think Trump had a lot to do with that. And I think that Biden isn't fixing it.
I do Jesus, baby. Yeah. I do Jesus. I'm going to give it up to the good Lord upstairs, and I'm just going to trust what he got to give because he's going to protect us all in the end.
So anyone is fine by you?
As long as he's got the lead up hand, that's who I trust.
Nobody's mentioned what happened on January the 6th when they're talking about Donald Trump. But is that something that you think is putting you off him, or do you not really mind that?
No, I don't think that Trump was unaware of what was happening, but I don't think that he also was a driving force behind it. People have free will and they choose to make really dumb decisions, and those people did. Those people are in no way a reflection of the greater portion of the Republican Party, and I don't foresee that happening again, but it certainly does put a stain on the ticket.
Oh, well, I mean, that's really interesting. I'm imagining the corn dogs as we speak. I think what's really interesting about those Voxes is that it sort of brings out exactly what we were just talking about in the polls, right? Which is that it's a story of two bases. Trump's base, despite all of the difficulties he's in, the legal difficulties, in fact, perhaps not just despite of, but because of the legal difficulties, is remaining completely rock solid. Meanwhile, Biden's own base, the pillars on which he built that 2020 victory, the young, black voters, Latino voters, suburban voters, and indeed on which the Democrats built a pretty strong performance in 2022, is falling. His own base is starting to contract. At the same time that Trump is becoming more amenable to those same voters, as we were discussing. And I think there are clearly like three reasons for this, right? One is there is this sense of, and we just heard it a little bit in the people you were talking to, this sense of chaos that Trump is saying, look, this international chaos didn't happen while I was president. It wouldn't happen under me again. The economy, as we know, has been difficult. And some people, quite a few voters, and this polling again bears it out, blame Biden directly for that and remember the Trump years as being better for them economically. Again, we can dispute any of the particular facts of this, but this is the impression. I.e. Biden has become a weaker candidate over the last 4 years. And then I think there's something else that's really interesting. I don't know what you think about this, but I think that one of the elements we're seeing here is that, Trump just isn't around as much. Insofar as he is around, he is embroiled in these legal problems, which is causing him some difficulties in some respects. But you can see that one of the reasons Trump did so badly with black voters and with Latino voters in 2016 and 2020, he was constantly offending them. He was constantly attacking them or attacking issues that they cared about, say Black Lives Matter or so on. People have started to forget exactly what a Trump presidency was like on a day-to-day basis, the chaos that it was involved in that, and instead, entirely, legitimately, have in their minds instead what is in front of them at the moment, which is the fallibilities and weaknesses of a Biden administration. So in a way, his being in the background a little bit has helped him tremendously.
I was struck by two things. One is that when we try and report on the economy in the US right now, we always talk about Joe Biden having done the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, having brought down inflation as a rate to below 4%, much better than our own in the UK. And yet, actually, these are measures that might be huge in terms of infrastructure and in terms of major political projects, but it's not yet helping people on the ground. It's not yet helping people go to the grocery store or buy their weekly goods. These are sort of projects that will probably bear fruit in 5 or 10 years' time. And people are talking to you not about democracy, but about the price of gas. So when you mention January the 6th, there's a kind of like cloudiness that comes over people's faces. And they don't really want to talk about it because it's actually not the thing that's foremost in their mind. They want to talk about whether they can run their cars for longer on cheaper gas. And that is the thing that will actually play strongest to many voters right now. I think the second thing is this whole idea that Trump is in legal difficulty, which the Democrats, quite frankly, are depending on. And indeed, the polling that we've seen today completely flips around if there is a conviction for Trump in those questions of whether he overturned or attempted to overturn democracy in the 2020 election. Then we would see Biden conclusively win in all those swing states, according to that New York Times polling. But I think this idea that Trump is getting into bigger legal difficulties, which means he's into bigger political difficulties, is wrong. Because again, it goes back to the messaging. Trump has turned it around. He's compared himself to Nelson Mandela, for Christ's sake. He's actually saying that every time something happens to him, it is a witch hunt. The system is under attack. He is under attack. They, his voters, his supporters, you, if you like, are under attack. And again, people are starting to parrot that back to us now. So even people who say they believe in the rule of law, who strongly want to believe in the Constitution, who might be veterans in the US Army, are starting to suggest to us that there is something that's not quite right, that they don't 100% believe in the computing systems, for example, here in the state of Georgia, that they don't like the way that they were counted, that they back Trump up in that phone call he famously made where he called for an election official to find him 11,000 votes. This kind of stuff tells you that what he is saying out on the campaign trail, and I guess you could say that we've seen less of Trump, that's certainly true, or else you could flip it and say it was 2020 when he wasn't actually allowed to sort of rally and campaign because of the COVID shutdowns that we didn't see him. Now he's back. He's feeding people their lines and they are repeating them back to us. And I think that they are convinced that there is a witch hunt out to get him and that he is fighting the good fight on their behalf. And that's incredibly powerful messaging.
Well, yes, it is. Although we should also say, as this polling and other polling shows, Trump is not that much more popular than he was in 2020. What this is about Biden being a less attractive candidate than he was in 2020. I mean, there's another stat in this polling, right, which shows that people no longer think that Biden has the temperament to be president. Biden doesn't have the temperament to be president, right? Which on like any, I think most objective reading, as you would say, of the two men, you know, there is one guy who kind of has certainly the more traditional temperament to be president by comparison to Trump. And the other element of that is because if on one level, if you looked at this polling and you were a Democratic strategist, you might think, Christ, this is catastrophic. We're losing all of these pillars of our electoral coalition that we've relied on for years, the young, the ethnic minorities, and so on. We could be looking at a realignment here. And yet, actually, Democrats can then go, oh, hang on a minute. Actually, if you look a bit deeper into the polling, you can see that virtually any other Democrat, including, by the way, Kamala Harris, who up to this point has been, you know, tremendously unpopular. She's almost been a sort of running joke in the Beltway, right, about how bad a kind of political figure she's become. According to this polling, if Kamala Harris was running against Trump, she would reverse much of this hemorrhage, many of these losses, particularly among black voters, Latino voters, and the young. So we're now in a situation where Biden has to try and essentially, instead of being the asset to his party, as he was in 2020, the guy who was outpolling his party, and someone like Harris, he's now in the other position. So the Democrats have got this question they've now got to wrestle with, right? And Biden's got to wrestle with it as well. And you're seeing this question that has only hitherto been whispered by Democrats now becoming more and more audible. Would it actually be better if we had someone else on the ticket? Because the risk is so great of a Trump restoration that if Biden, it's the opposite question from 2020, where it looked like Biden was the only guy who could do it. If Biden's the only guy who might lose it for us, should we get rid of him and put someone else? It's late to do it, but it's still possible.
This is what David Axelrod, who is very well respected in kind of Democrat circles, very close aide of Obama, you know, really one of his key election strategy team. And he was tweeting yesterday, only Joe Biden can make the decision, which is that sort of fateful line that you leave, meaning, well, it's up to you, but I know what I'd be doing. And he went on to say what he has to decide is whether that's in the best interests of the country. Now, look, I think his aides, Biden's aides, would say he's continually underestimated, right? He was underestimated right in the lead up to 2020, and he pulled it off, and actually we're still a year out, and they will say that Obama's polling figures and even Reagan's polling figures were in a pretty similar place, sort of a year out from their respective elections. One thing I would say, though, is this, again, I'm going back to the messaging, and it is this sense that Trump represents strength and Biden represents weakness. And there, I think, is, perhaps we don't appreciate it enough, a real kind of admiration, certainly in parts of the South here, for the kind of strongman leader, you know, and that is something that Trump has really used to his advantage. And so the painting of Biden, not just as old or as slightly feeble, but as a man who is weak, you know, a man who is indecisive. Yes, and I think, I mean, everything we've actually seen in terms of the speed with which he's responded to the Israel-Gaza crisis, the speed with which he's got actual bills passed in terms of infrastructure and green energy, the speed at which he's sort of prioritized the economy and bringing down inflation, all the rest of it, doesn't speak to that. But visually, it's very powerful for Trump just to say, look at me, I'm strong. Look at this guy, I'm weak. I think the other thing you mentioned was the whole, the way that Democrats have naturally or historically seen groups of voters, Latino voters in particular. And I think there was a kind of assumption that if you were Latino, you would automatically be Democrat because, you know, weren't you the underdog and weren't you the immigrant and wouldn't you come to the party that kind of was kinder to you? And I think there has been some pushback on that. And it's partly because Latinos, you know, I mean, it sounds like a sort of crazy generalization, but there are many Latino communities in which actually conservative values, Catholic values, anti-abortion values will be much more strongly felt. There's also a real spirit of entrepreneurship and sort of startup businesses.
Well, Bush
and
people very well with
wanting
them
to
in the
get out.
2000s.
Memorably, right? And so, I think there's also a pushback, and maybe it sort of hit peak, sort of pushback in 2016 with Hillary Clinton, of groups kind of going, oh my God, really? Do you want to be, no, do we have to be your identity project? Do we have to be your victim identity project? We're not just Latinos, we're actually businessmen and women, or we are conservatives, or we are, families trying to raise our kids in the right way. And I wonder whether the more that the Dems sort of break down these people as if they belong to them, the further they're pushing them away.
But isn't this the irony that we could be potentially heading to an election where, according to this poll, and we should just say as well, in terms of the effect, the sort of attritional effect on elements of the Democratic coalition, that isn't just in this polling. It's been most stark in this polling, but it has been a trend which has been taking place over the last couple of years, where for the young, for ethnic minority voters, for lots of different reasons, they have soured on Biden in particular. And as I say, it is entirely possible that Biden can turn that around. As you said, Emily, Obama was in quite a similar position in 2012 for his re-elect. Bush was in a similar coalition position with his base in 2004 for his re-elect. Both of them managed to run election campaigns which turned it around. Biden could well do the same and get back to a similar-ish sort of position he was in 2020. If this were to sustain, though, the irony could be that we could be heading for an election where, guess who Biden is doing best at with his polling? It's older white voters, the sort of people that Trump's coalition was absolutely based around. These are the people, according to the polling, who are most concerned about Trump and his being a threat to democracy. And so we could be heading for an election where Biden tries to eke out a win, which he could still do, by the way, in just focusing relentlessly on those sort of voters who dominate in the swing states, the traditional swing states of the Midwest, like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where Biden is still ahead, and Michigan and so on. And where Trump is trying to make outreach into these traditional Democrat bases of, Latino voters. And I noticed who is apparently Trump doing an interview with this week. He's doing an interview with Univision, the Spanish television network, someone that he offended and has to leave from a press conference, I think, back in 2016. So his campaign is nothing if not flexible and versatile, and they will go to where the political opportunity is. And I suppose one other thing with regards to this polling in terms of the effect it could have or will have is that it is, again, in terms of the Republican nomination process, which we've barely talked about because we're just assuming he's going to be the candidate, that just cements his presence in it again, right? Because the big argument against him, the other candidates, the Nikki Haley's of the world and so on, were making, Chris Christie's, was to say, this guy isn't electable. Look what happened in 2022. And here you have a polling showing him way out ahead.
Yeah, it's amazing that we are 2 days away from the next Republican debate, which will be held in Miami. And yet it doesn't really feel like it's happening because, once again, Trump won't show up. He's the front runner. And so we're left with a bench of, I guess, the way those candidates would see themselves as their substitutes, right?
Ghost.
If Trump doesn't make it, if Trump is convicted, then suddenly their role becomes really important. But up to that point, they're just kind of sitting on the bench waiting to be called up. But I guess the other reason that we came to Georgia, not just that it is a purple state, a swing state, as they now say, it went blue for the first time in 30 years. It hasn't been blue since Bill Clinton's first term. But 3 months ago, a grand jury actually found Trump indicted on 13 counts of criminal charges. And of all the legal troubles that Trump faces, this trial perhaps is the most dangerous. 4 of his senior aides have already pleaded guilty to election interference. And they are in a position now where they will have to give witness to what actually went on. So if you want to see a dangerous legal path that Trump is now being forced to tread, it is right here in the state of Georgia. And what was fascinating for us was that as we were leaving the fair last night, we went to the sort of county Republican tent. This is the actual tent of the Republican Party. And we were trying to understand what the feeling for Trump was there. And we talked to John Browning, who used to be a Democrat. His father was a union man. He voted for Clinton 30 years ago. And he begins by talking us through what he's seeing in terms of the merchandise, quite frankly, that people are buying. But then he explains to me how they see this whole question of the trial, the indictments, that Donald Trump is facing now in the state of Georgia?
We're both with the party. We don't endorse at this point. We're obviously going to go to the primary. But I mean, obviously, Trump is the most popular candidate at this point. But we're going to get behind whoever the candidate is.
So when you're selling merchandise, are people buying the Trump stuff, or are they?
Yeah, that's why it's here. It's not an endorsement, but let's be honest. And fundraising wise, that makes about 70-80% of our fundraising. We take donations because we're a nonprofit. So when people want to make donations for items, Trump is by far the items you have to have. I mean, that's just the way it is. We've had some DeSantis. It just hasn't done well. Now, I like DeSantis. I got nothing personally against DeSantis, but he's just not registering on the scale of Trump. It's just a reality, right? Nikki Haley, there's nobody else at this point. And I know he makes some people uncomfortable, but it is what it is, right?
When you see the legal activity against Trump, does that hit your donations, or does it go the other way around?
It is quite the opposite. It seems the more that they go after him, the more that I say the people that we encounter here at these fairs and festivals, they want him more. That makes them root for him more. It is completely the opposite. I've never seen anything like it. I'm actually quite shocked.
What does that tell you? I mean, I'm just kind of like...
He resonates to the blue-collar people in a way I've never seen.
Did donations drop after January the 6th? Like, do people question what was going on after the insurrection?
I feel like that made me want to go get more directly involved to see how much was actually true. Because we have division in our own party. Let's just talk about that for a second. That's the truth. We have a division in our own party. There's those of us that don't want to question some of the weird things that happen with the election, right? They don't want us to question that. And I think it's fair to question it. We have a right as citizens to question it.
Do you trust your electoral system then? I mean, that's
I
a bigger...
have questions. That's what we're saying. When you say trust,
yeah.
Am I 100%
you represent
sure?
the Republican Party, and yours is not a unique voice in the party saying, I'm not really sure, right?
That's exactly right. We're a divided party on that. We're absolutely a divided party, and I think it's on a national level too. But I'm just telling you, people are very concerned about the last election. And
still,
it's never gone away. You say still, you have to, it is on the government to prove everything was, you should be able to show evidence, and the evidence should match. Our voter rolls, we shouldn't have more people on our voter rolls than what we normally have. Let's not forget, when Trump was elected, we spent 2 years, almost 3. Russia helped Trump get elected. And nobody treated them the way that we have been treated. Oh, tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorists. It's, we were like, hey, all you have to do is prove what you say. The media ran wild with that, and nothing has been proven. Now, that's the kind of thing that emboldens the working class people who like Trump. That's what I don't think the hierarchy understands in each party, right? You can look down on the middle class and say, oh, they're just riding this wave. When you sit there and you allow that to happen, and they see everything. They see it all. They don't forget. See, the media moves on. I get it. You got to move on with the issues of the day. We never forget. And that's why Trump resonates.
Why do you think that 4 of Trump's closest aides pleaded guilty to election interference in the trial that's been brought against him now?
Have you ever followed any major case? They squeeze people. When people get threatened with jail time, often they will do that.
I mean, look, just to remind our listeners, they have not found any evidence in 63 legal cases that Donald Trump was cheated out of an election result that he won. And yet this feeling persists, Lewis, and you can hear it through people who actually talk you through the idea that they're not conspiracists. They do not want to believe they're conspiracists. This guy actually said to me, it's not like we've got these kind of crazy tin hats on and we're all talking conspiracies. They genuinely believe that there is a system out there that is not telling them the truth. And that is an incredibly hard narrative for kind of, legal-minded people or, Democrats if you want, Joe Biden if you want, to try and break. In a moment, we're going to hear from a Georgia congressman, Buddy Carter, and he's trying with that famous Southern charm to weave a very delicate line between believing in the rule of law, adhering to the rule of law, and supporting the man that his party will almost certainly be putting at the top of the ticket. That's coming up. About 10 minutes away from downtown Atlanta, we find this beautiful, leafy, stunning golf course. And there, Buddy Carter, he's a Georgia congressman. And he was part originally of the MAGA train. He refused to certify Joe Biden in the election that brought him to power in 2020. In other words, he went against the US Constitution. He actually went against the President of the United States. Except now, curiously, he's one of the more reflective, more nuanced Republicans in this part of the world. He's trying to find a way to work cross-party, and he says he does want to abide by the rule of law, even if that finds against Trump in these trials. Just have a listen as we work out the path very delicately with whether he is or isn't supporting Donald Trump for the presidency next time round. You've had quite a time up in Washington over the last few weeks. You're a 5-term congressman. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if the Republican Party is feeling a bit crazy at the moment.
Well, it's been tough. There's no question about that. And, we feel like we've got the train back on the tracks now. We've got a new speaker, as you well know, and that's extremely important. But I think we've learned a lot of important lessons here in the past few weeks. And certainly we understand how important it is for the American people to know that we're unified and to have the confidence that we're unified. Look, democracy is messy. And it can be very messy, and certainly that's been on display in the past few weeks. It was very close, and we lost some very close seats. But at the same time, I'm sure that did have some impact on it. I just don't think it had a lot of impact on it.
Yeah. From the UK, the question we keep on being asked is, where is the Republican Party now in terms of Donald Trump? Is he still your figurehead? Is he still your leader? Is he going to be your presidential candidate?
Well, and all indications point toward him being the candidate now, the nominee, and certainly, whereas I haven't publicly made an endorsement yet, I will be in the next couple of weeks. And it's pretty obvious that Donald Trump is in the lead and by a wide margin.
And you don't mind that?
Look, I love Donald Trump's policies. I've always said, right on policy, wrong on tone. And I do believe we could work on the tone a little bit, but his policies, I think, are exceptional. And, if you look back at his administration, you'll see that our economy was humming. I mean, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had our economy on track. We were really doing well.
But I guess it's more than policy now. It's about whether a man who kind of tried to overturn democracy, did try to overturn democracy, is fit to lead again. Am I right in thinking that you didn't certify Joe Biden?
I did not certify Joe Biden. I have acknowledged Joe Biden as the duly elected president of the United States, and I did that shortly before he was inaugurated. And I vowed at that time to work with him and to try to find common ground so that we could move this country forward together. Unfortunately, I don't feel like he felt the same way. I don't think it was reciprocated, and I didn't feel like he was really interested in working with us.
But you don't get to not certify the actual president as decided by the Constitution of the United States.
Well, let's backtrack on that a little bit now. My reasons for not agreeing to certify Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania had to do with the process itself. The changes that were made at the last minute in Georgia, which were substantial, then I felt were unconstitutional. And you will remember that our current speaker, Mike Johnson, who is a constitutional lawyer, also agreed with that, and he did not certify that. The changes that were made by the courts in Pennsylvania and in Arizona were done in a way that I felt were not constitutional, and that's why I voted not to certify those. However, again, I've acknowledged, first of all, that what happened on January 6th, I condemn that. That should not have happened. Those people should be arrested. They should be given due process, and they should be prosecuted to full extent of the law. But at the same time, I was not going to certify those elections that I felt like changes were made by the judge, by the courts, as well as by the executive branch, and in the case of Georgia, it was by the Secretary of State, that were unconstitutional.
And should Donald Trump feel the full effects of the law?
for January the 6th?
Listen, anyone, regardless of whether they're president or regardless of what office they hold, they should feel the effects, sure. If it's proven that he had something to do with that. I still think that's...
You don't think he had anything to do with January the 6th?
Look, that's not for me to judge. That's for courts to judge. And my point is that I still believe in our judicial system. I still have faith in our judicial system, even though I do feel like the judicial branch and the FBI have been weaponized by this administration and used against conservatives.
So just talk me through that, because that's kind of confusing for us. You say you do believe in the judicial system, but you don't believe in this trial, but you do believe that the FBI has been weaponized, but you will work with Joe Biden, but you didn't certify him as president. I mean, that's quite a lot to have to get your head around. Like, do you believe in the democratic processes that underlie and uphold the Constitution of the United States?
And I believe in the Constitution. And again, that's why I felt like with the research that I had done and with the advice that I was given, and
that phone call where Trump literally said, "Find me 11,000 votes."
Well,
I mean, what was that about?
Well, look, we can get into all that, but the point...
let's go on.
No, the point I'm trying to make is that I can only control what I can do, and that I'm just trying to explain to you where I was coming from, and justify why I made those decisions. But I will tell you this, and that is, when I'm back in my district, I'm not hearing about what the former president may or may not have done. What I'm hearing about is about this economy, about inflation, about people not being able to afford gas and groceries, and about our southern border and how it's porous, and about the illegal drugs coming across that border, the illegal immigrants coming across that border. I'm hearing about crime in our major cities. That's what the people are concerned about.
If Donald Trump gets the nomination, but is also convicted in any one of these, 90 indictments, what happens then? Just spell out for me. Does he take up the presidency from jail? Does the Republican Party decide that you can't support a convicted man?
Look, we could deal with hypotheticals all day long.
It's not that hypothetical, though, is it? I mean, honestly, he's probably going to be your nominee.
He is probably going to be our nominee.
And he's definitely facing trial, and there are definitely about 90 indictments. So it's not the most hypothetical thing that we can imagine.
Well, look, I'm not a lawyer. It's not for me to say. I do believe in our Constitution.
I mean, come on, Congressman Carter. What's your gut saying?
What my gut is saying is that, that's not for me to say. I don't know what the situation may bring. What I do know is this, is that we've got to get this economy back on track, that we've got to become, again, the leader of the free world here in America, that we've got to portray strength through power. That is extremely important. The world, our allies, are depending on us. And right now, they're not getting that through this administration, because this administration is viewed as being weak on the world stage.
Congressman Carter, really good to speak to you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Buddy Carter, one of so many who is, I guess, parroting the Trump line that something was wrong, that the system was wrong, that something's broken, and that they have to find out what it was. And I guess the real question here, for so many in the party, is what happened to the Republican Party in that crucial fortnight after January the 6th, the fortnight when they could have stepped in, when they could have said what happened here at the Capitol building was not okay. What happened in this attempt to overturn democracy was not okay. And our party has to be responsible enough to stop things here and say, we need to start afresh. We need to find the person who we want to represent us. Into that vacuum, I guess, grew the MAGA crowd again, and grew Donald Trump. And once they have seen him as a potential winner yet again, no one wants to risk losing out to the Democrats in that party.
This is the thing that I think that's most disturbing and most worrying over the long term, which is that Trump, apart from actually older voters, the salience of the election denialism, the lies, the myth-making, the conspiracy itself to subvert the government is of remarkably low salience, even compared to a year or so ago. And maybe that's easy for us to say because we're not in America and we're not subject to the economy there and all of these things. But nonetheless, it is surprising. And I think it goes back to that conundrum that Biden now has to confront, right? Which is that the whole point for Biden running in 2020 was the idea the Democrats had that they had to save American democracy. Arguably, in fact, I don't think actually arguably, that process or that incentive or that need is all the greater now. 2024 is even more important because between 2020 and 24, we've had the election denialism. Biden's the entire premise of his presidency has been about showing the American public that democracy works, that Washington works, that democracy is stronger than autocracy. He has now got to decide whether he is the person to carry that mantle on to 2024 or whether he's potentially the problem. Right, now Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has, not for the first time, probably not for the last, found herself in some political hot water, although probably she won't find it political hot water for reasons we might go on to discuss. Over the course of the weekend, you may have seen that she tweeted that she is planning to impose restrictions on tents for rough sleepers in Britain. And she tweeted this: "The British people are compassionate. We will always support those who are genuinely homeless, but we cannot allow our streets to be taken over by rows of tents occupied by people, many of them from abroad, living on the streets, quote, as a lifestyle choice." Now, that last bit of the sentence drew particular ire from all sorts of different quarters, political opponents, sure, homelessness charities, even from some within her own party, more quietly. Claire Coutinho, the Energy Secretary, close ally of Rishi Sunak, was asked about this on LBC by Nick Ferrari this morning.
Do you think homelessness is a choice of lifestyle?
So before I came into Parliament, Nick, I worked in social justice. I worked with people who are homeless. So I wouldn't necessarily use that language myself, but I would say that people who are living on the streets in that kind of entrenched poverty, we should make sure that we're getting them into safe accommodation, that we get a roof over their heads, and that we're getting them that help, which the Home Secretary also talked about for people who are struggling with things like addiction, for example. They need that help. They need that compassion so that we can get them out of that entrenched poverty.
It's really interesting to hear that. She doesn't want to be anywhere near Suella's comments, clearly. And I guess the point is, you could just park this whole thing in the slightly sort of batshit crazy corner of the room and say, oh, well, this goes along with, hate marches and the kind of language that Suella loves using to provoke a response. Except that this is actually a proposal, right, that will be for a new criminal justice bill for England and Wales, which then forms part of the government's legislative programme that would be outlined in the King's speech on Tuesday. So it actually could become part of UK government law if this all goes ahead.
Yeah, it's a serious thing. And look, on one level, the growth of tents on the streets of Britain to house homeless people, she is right. That is a problem. We don't want to see that. You're in the US now, Emily. I've just come back from the US. You won't find a US city, walk through the streets of a US city these days and not find, particularly on the West Coast in places like San Francisco, seeing tent after tent of people literally living in tents as their permanent accommodation. We don't want to see that in the UK. Of course we don't. So on that level, she's right. But the answer to it is clearly not just to take away the tents and move them on somewhere else. The answer to it clearly is to ensure that people who are sleeping rough, of whom there are about 2,500 a night on average in England and Wales, are given accommodation and a safe space to call home on a regular basis every single night, as we did during the pandemic. And I think obviously what is problematic, or what people were criticising about the Braverman tweet, is this. Obviously, this problem has not come out of nowhere and does not come without context, which the context being that over the last 10 years, homelessness has increased. The number of people living in temporary accommodation, so not roofless but homeless, has risen by an alarming 74% in the last 10 years. New research from Shelter showed at least 271,000 people are recorded as homeless in England, including 123,000 children. Now, many of them will be in temporary, or all of the kids should be in temporary accommodation, but no one would describe that as a lifestyle choice. That is something that has been imposed upon them as a result of skyrocketing housing costs, a housing crisis which is a catastrophe in terms of social policy in this country. And though there are myriad different reasons which have driven this, what the government can't say is that it's not happened on their watch. So if there is a problem increasingly with people living in tents, we've got to do something about it, which doesn't involve just taking the tents away and moving them somewhere else.
Completely. I mean, you put your finger on it when you said that this isn't a solution to homelessness. There are solutions to homelessness. You've only got to talk to Andy Burnham about the kind of work that he has done as the Greater Manchester Mayor to actually help people off the streets. This is a bit like saying we're going to take your bedding away, right? We're going to take your bedding away, and that's a lifestyle choice. That doesn't stop homelessness. That just leaves people even colder out on the streets. So I guess you have to assume there is a kind of a method to the wording here, as we see so often, whether it's having a dream about the flight to Rwanda, whether it's about the hate march of, everyone who's on the streets. It's the kind of language that is honestly meant to provoke, and it has provoked. It's provoked the wrath of clearly opposition leaders, but also 15 charities who've written in saying, do you realise what happens to homeless people in terms of their life expectancy? It is between 43 and 45 years old. That is not a lifestyle choice. But she is not speaking to them. She's speaking over their heads to the people who want to hear, I guess going back to the Trump thing, this kind of like strong man, strong woman, authoritarian voice. She thinks that's popular, and she might be right.
Well, I think there is another way in which there is a sort of parallel or an echo of US politics with this, increasingly in UK politics, which is the kind of role that the city plays in American politics and UK politics and in the intra-left-right debate. For quite a long time now, particularly in the Trump years and intensifying again recently, the idea of the city, the Democrat, nearly always Democrat-controlled city, is a kind of boogeyman in American politics. You sort of point to it, it's full of crime, it's full of homelessness, it's full of tents, and it's used as a way of geeing up the base, right, in the Republican Party. You've started to see, I think, similar-ish kind of tendencies start to happen in the UK. I mean, I was struck over the weekend at the number of tweets coming from kind of right and radical right figures sort of lambasting and slamming the Metropolitan Police, and about the way that the protests have been handled with regards to Gaza. This idea that's constantly coming out now on the right, that the idea of London in particular, but also other cities, as lawless. And I think that there is an element within this where British politicians, particularly on the right, have started to echo or started to paint a picture of British cities being these slightly sort of fearful places where there is, if not anarchy, then less law and order than there should be. And as I say, I think, in the way that Suella Braverman often kind of conducts her politics, and we've not just seen it in this case, but in other examples as well, you can see some of those echoes of the rightward turn in politics that she's, I think, in some level, whether it's conscious or not, picking up from American politics and American Republican politics.
We're heading out today to South Carolina, which is the home of two of the other Republican hopefuls, Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. Interesting how many of the women that we spoke to yesterday, the ones who weren't big Trump fans, started saying, is it time for a woman? And I guess the only woman really in this race is Nikki Haley. And she is creeping up to quite an impressive second place now. Along with Ron DeSantis, who's kind of tumbled down. They're both miles behind Trump, but we're heading off to her hometown to see if people think she's just waiting in the wings in case something happens to Donald Trump, in case he is convicted, in case he doesn't manage to get on that final ballot. Would she be the one that could take the Republican Party into the next presidency?
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.